So after wishing you a Chodesh Tov and whatever's left of Hanukkah Sameach, we're looking here at the Amudei Hod on page Yud Ches, and we began summarizing the various shitos regarding Daled Kosos. So we want to see if we can make progress in this very intensive and analytic overview of the various shitos in the Rishonim regarding Daled Kosos. So this you'll find on page Yud Ches, and you'll see a section that starts Sikum. So we have an overview here, and it's subdivided into 8 different subcategories. And then in Mirz Hashem, we can finish up this whole section in Amudei Hod with Siman Gimel, and that'll take us till the laws of Heseva, which will be our second major topic. But we still have a little bit left to finish in the Otzer Hayun. Not much, but so we start with the Rashbam and Tosfos and the first interpretation of Rabbeinu Peretz. And the chiyuv of Daled Kosos fundamentally is Al Seder HaGadah. So we have Daled Kosos, Al Seder HaGadah. And each kos has its respective bracha. And if he drinks bevasachas, shelo Al Seder HaGadah, then he's missing the fundamental and essential kiyum of the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. Even though it does say Yidei Yayin Yotza in the case of Sheson B'Vasachas, so he hasn't drunk Daled Kosos Al Seder HaBrachos, but he did drink 4 cups of wine. That refers to the mitzvah of Simcha. So he can fulfill the mitzvah of Simcha, Simchas Yontiv, by drinking Daled Kosos, even Shelo Al Seder HaBrachos. But again, as far as Daled Kosos is concerned, he has not fulfilled the basic mitzvah of Daled Kosos. Now we have another dimension of Daled Kosos, and that's called Hora al Cherus, which means to demonstrate that we are Bnei Chorim. And for that, we require mezugos, and he has to dilute the concentrated wine in order to make it a shtia derech cherus. But this dimension is already a hidur mitzvah. That's already an embellishment of the mitzvah. The basic mitzvah is Daled Kosos Al Seder HaGadah. Each kos is drunk after having recited its unique bracha on that kos. And we said that there are 4 kosos. There's the 4 brachos. We have the bracha of Kiddush, the bracha of Magid of Kol Yisrael, the bracha of Birkas Hamazon, and finally the bracha of Halak. So that is the essential mitzvah of Daled Kosos. Yidei Yayin Yotza, which means that if he drank Yayin Mazug, he fulfills his mitzvah of Simchas Yontiv. But Simchas Yontiv again is extraneous to Daled Kosos. He drank 4 kosos b'vasachas, shelo Al Seder HaBrachos, so he forfeits the critical and essential mitzvah of Daled Kosos Shel Bracha. Each kos with its own unique bracha. He can fulfill a mitzvah of Horas Cherus by drinking Daled Kosos b'vasachas shelo Al Seder HaBrachos. Again, for that, he has to drink Yayin Mazud. So if he had 4 kosos of Yayin Mazud, which he drank consecutively, without the Seder HaBrachos, he does fulfill one dimension, and that is Horas Cherus, meaning to demonstrate that he has been liberated from slavery. But he did not fulfill his basic chiyuv, because that basic chiyuv is Daled Kosos Al Seder. Now, if he drank Daled Kosos Al Seder, but it was Yayin Chai, then although he has forfeited the kiyum of Horas Cherus because he drank undiluted concentrated wine, but he did fulfill the basic mitzvah of Daled Kosos Al Seder HaBrachos, albeit without that special embellishment, that Hidur mitzvah of Yain Mazug, which achieves Hora Lacheres. But again, we see very clearly that in the Shita of this first group of Rishonim, Rashbam and Kosos, the basic and fundamental definition of this mitzvah Daled Kosos is Daled Kosos al Seder HaBrachos, which can be fulfilled without Yain Mazug, but only if he drank it Keseder HaGadah. If he drank them all consecutively, then he's missing the most basic fundamental element of the mitzvah Daled Kosos, because he hasn't recited them al Seder HaBrachos. He might fulfill one dimension, but that's again a secondary dimension of Horas Cherus. I'm sorry, I meant to say that he might fulfill an extraneous kiyum of Simchas Yontiv insofar as he drank Daled Kosos Shel Yayin. But now we have a case where he drank Daled Kosos al Seder, but it was Yayin Chai. In that case, he has fulfilled his basic, fundamental, and essential mitzvah of Daled Kosos, each kos with its own bracha. Since he drank Yain Chai, he did not embellish the mitzvah with the Horas Cherus of Yain Mazuk. So that really is, shall we say, one shita in the Rishonim, which is quite popular amongst the Rishonim. It's not like, some far-flung singular opinion against all the other Rishonim. This is a basic school of thought in the Rishonim. And it's, in a sense, it's a very attractive position because it allows you to define the mitzvah in terms of the brachos. And it means that it's not just secondary or coincidental that the structure of the Daled Kosos was organized to correspond with and link up with the Daled Brachos. The Daled Brachos really define the Kosos. You may recall that we discussed within the context of this Shita the possibility that each one of the members of the household will have to have Yayin Sharoy L'Nisach Al Gabi Mizbeach. Why? Because the essence of the kos is the bracha, and the first of the four kosos is a koshel kiddush. And the Rambam Shita is that kiddush requires that Yayin that's royal L'Nisach Al Gabi Mizbeach. Again, I'm not going to go through all the details. That's a discussion of an hour. But the point is that we see to what extent the bracha itself sets up the kos. And the Daled Kosos, in a sense, is dragged along by the, the ikar should be karam here, are the brachos. And we'll see later on the Shitas HaRosh that the amount of wine that you'd have to drink for each of the Daled Kosos is determined by the brachos themselves. Yeah? Okay. My wife just told me something. Okay. So in any event, that's the first Shita. So it's very easy, I think, to summarize the Shita and to identify with Shita because of the Daled Kosos Shel Bracha. You want to enhance the mitzvah by drinking Daled Kosos Mizugos, which gives you an additional element of what? Of the kiyum of Horas Cherus. But again, that's, we have to put things in perspective. That's secondary. That's an extra, shall we say, call it a cherry on top, if you will. I just want to ask my wife one question. Mechila, sorry. All right. Could you tell me Also, I'm gonna apologize. I need a 5-minute break. Sorry. We're now going to study the sheet of Rabbeinu Peretz in his second presentation, and that you'll see on the bottom of page Yud Ches on the right side. And he writes that Simchas Yontif now plays a major role. And although in general for Yontif, all you have to drink is one kos of yayin, but with regard to Pesach, the Chazal sort of jumped on the bandwagon and they established that he should be Mekayim Simchas Yontif with the Daled Kosos. So there was like a meeting of minds, an overlap here. Since they already had a structure of drinking wine for the Daled Kosos, they used that structure in order to facilitate the Kiyum mitzvah of Simchas Yontif. So now we go through the two parts of the Gemara. Part number one, Sheson b'vasachas, Yidei Yayin Yotza. What does it mean? Again, he didn't drink the 4 Kosos al Seder HaGodah, but he was Yotzei the mitzvah Simchas Yontif, which is unique to Pesach, namely that you drink 4 cups of wine. But Yidei Daled Kosos Yot Lo Yotza. What does that mean? And here we deviate from the first shot of the Rashban Tosta Rabbeinu Peretz, and that is that Lo Yotzi de Chovas Yayin de Simchas Yontif, because again, that's our topic now, Min HaMuvcha. And here we have a very interesting lumbus. What we're going to say is that since he drank all 4 kosos, the Vasachas, Shalol Seder HaBrachos, then basically, as far as the kiyum of Daled Kosos is concerned, he only fulfilled one of the 4 kosos. So let's give an example. Let's say with Kiddush. He recited Kiddush, drank the first kos, and then subsequently, one after the other, in consecutive order, he drank another 3 kosos. So as far as Daled Kosos is concerned, he really only fulfilled the first of the 4 kosos, namely Koshel Kiddush. Now, how does this impact on Simchas Yontif? Well, the perfect, ideal kiyum of Simchas Yontif is to drink all 4 kosos. In other words, he has a Daled Kosos, he fulfilled that mitzvah Daled Kosos, and then the Mela, almost automatically, what's dragged along is the kiyum of Simchas Yontif through the 4 kosos. But now, since he drank them b'masachas, he really only has one of the 4 kosos, namely that kos on which he recited a bracha. We gave an example of Kiddush, and he only has one of the 4 cups. So now the kiyum of Simchas Yontif is broken up. It's incomplete. He's got the kiyum of Simchas Yontif in the full sense with regard to one of the 4 kosos, but to some extent, the 4 kosos form one entity made up of 4 parts, of which he only fulfilled one of the 4 parts, because he only recited the bracha on one of those 4. He says, there was only one kos that had the advantage of the bracha. Therefore, he doesn't have the full-fledged mitzvah of Simchas Yontif, which requires that he drink all 4 kosos. And through those 4 kosos, each of which he drank the yayin of that kos, and each kos had its own bracha, then he fulfills the ideal mitzvah, the perfect mitzvah of Simchas Yontif. But here, he only had a koshel bracha times 1, and therefore he only has 1/4 of the Daled Kosos. That 1/4 gives him an element of Simchas Yontif. If let's say he pours 4 cups of wine, and he doesn't recite any brachos. I mean, let's say he recites Baruch Pri Hagafen, okay, fine, it's a Birchas Hanenim, but he didn't even recite Kiddush. Then he has completely undermined his mitzvah Simchas Yantiv. He's hopping and jumping for joy because he drank 4 cups of wine. Each one had 14% alcohol, so he's really intoxicated. He's having a blast, but he has not fulfilled the mitzvah Simchas Yantiv. Even though had it been Shmuel Sukkos, he would have certainly fulfilled his mitzvah Simchas Yantiv, but not on Pesach, because he hasn't even dipped into one of the 4 Kosos of the Dalit Kosos. And the Rabbanan established that the mitzvah Simchas Yantiv on the night of Pesach could only be fulfilled through the Dalit Kosos. But let's go back to our case where he recited the bracha on one of the 4 Kosos. He has achieved 1/4 of Dalit Kosos, and with regard to that 1/4, he has a kiyum of Simchas Yantiv. So he has one part of Simchas Yantiv, but not the complete mitzvah Simchas Yantiv. And that's called Yedei Dalit Kosos Lo Yotza, which means he has not fulfilled the Simchas Yantiv of Dalit Kosos, because he only has 1 kosher bracha. The Lo Sheso Kechelik Mi Mitzvahs Dalit HaKosos. He doesn't have in that kos the entire enterprise of Dalit Kosos. So he has a tziruf, he has a connection between Simchas Yantiv and one of the 4 Kosos, so he has obtained some dimension of Simchas Yantiv, but that's only a partial dimension. So that's the case of Sheson Vasachas. Now we have the case of Sheson Chai, Yudei Yayin Yotza. What does Yudei Yayin Yotza mean? Now Yayin means Simchas Yantiv. He has 4 cups of wine. Each one had its own bracha, and he has the mitzvah of Arba Kosos, but the embellishment of Cherus, that he doesn't have. So he has the mitzvah of Simchas Yantiv, he has the mitzvah of Dalit Kosos, he doesn't have that additional dimension and embellishment, the Hidur mitzvah of Cherus. But he has Simchas Yantiv, because he drank 4 cups of wine, each with its own respective bracha, and he has a kiyum of Dalit Kosos. So his simcha, which is dragged along by the Dalit Kosos, is a complete mitzvah of simcha, even though his yayin is yayin chai. But he doesn't have that additional kiyum of chayr. When we compare the shita of Rabbeinu Peretz in his second commentary, his second interpretation to the Rashbam, Tosos, and Rabbeinu Peretz in his first commentary, we introduce a whole new element into the equation. I mean, it puts the whole sugya in a different perspective. Whereas according to Tosos and the Rashbam and Pirush Rishon of Rabbeinu Peretz, the whole perspective of the sugya is Dalit Kosos. And therefore, Sheson V'Vasachas, he forfeits the mitzvah of Dalit Kosos. In the context of Rabbeinu Peretz, in his second commentary, we're not talking about Dalit Kosos as much as we're talking about Simcha. And we're introducing a radical breakthrough in that Simcha on Pesach is determined by Dalit Kosos. Obviously, there are a lot of elements in the equation that remain common to both Pirush Rishon and Pirush Sheni, namely that Dalit Kosos requires the brachos. That's clear. And that's true for both Pirush Rishon of Rabbeinu Peretz and Pirush Sheni. You need those brachos. But the thrust of the sugya itself in Rabbeinu Peretz and Pirush Sheni is Simchas Yantiv. And since B'Masachas he only has one of the 4 kosos of the Dalit Kosos, his Simchas Yantiv is incomplete. If on the other hand he drank Dalit Kosos al Seder HaBrochos but Chai, then he has the full-fledged kiyum of Dalit Kosos al Seder HaBrochos. He has the full-fledged kiyum of Simchas Yantiv, but what he's lacking is that embellishment and that Hidur mitzvah of Derech Cherus, of Horas Cherus. That's what we have here. Now we move on to Rabbeinu David. Now Rabbeinu David is going to introduce the element of well, let's read it inside. Sheson Masachas Pirush on Shlomo Seder on. Okay, fine. The Yidei Yain Yotza, Kavani Yidei Mitzvah Daled Kosos Yotza. Wow. So here I think we get to the most radical rejection of everything that we've said until now in terms of what Daled Kosos is all about. Because up until this point, there's no doubt that Daled Kosos was all about the brachos. And therefore, Sheson Shelo Al Seder, you did not fulfill the mitzvah of Daled Kosos at all. You may have fulfilled a partial kiyum, as we said in Rabbeinu Peretz Pirusheni of Simchas Yontif. You may have fulfilled a partial kiyum of Horas Cheres because you drank yayin mazuk, according to Kosos and the Rashban. But in Sheson Masachas Shelo Seder Agada, according to all the Rishonim until this point of Rabbeinu David, you forfeited the basic critical mitzvah of Daled Kosos. That's universally accepted until we get to Rabbeinu David. And Rabbeinu David has a different girsa. His girsa is that Sheson Masachas mitzvah Yidei mitzvah Daled Kosos Yotza. He has fulfilled the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. It means that the mitzvah of Daled Kosos doesn't require the Seder Haggadah. It requires 4 shtiyos, and it's got to be yayin mazuk at this point. Shelo Al Seder and Yotze Yidei Daled Kosos. So it means that Seder Haggadah, such that each of the Daled shtiyos, so each of the Daled Kosos is connected to a bracha. All that is just a Hidur mitzvah. But it's Eino Ma'akiv is a mitzvah. Now, what happens if he drinks it chai? Yidei yayin yotza, hainu yidei mitzvahs arba kosos. So it means not only did he fulfill 4 shtiyos of 4 cups of wine, he also fulfilled 4 kosos shel bracha. So he gets that extra hidur, but he forfeits yidei cheres. And that hidur adds another element to the equation of cheres, of horas cheres. So he didn't drink it there cheres. So again, he has 2/3 of the mitzvah. I would say even more than 2/3. He has the basic kiyum of Daled Kosos, which means that he drank 4 cups of wine. On top of that, he has the kiyum of Kosos shel bracha, which again is a Hidur mitzvah, but nevertheless, it registers on the Richter scale. And what he's lacking here, in the case of Chai, is that 3rd element in the equation, that ultimate ideal cube of Derech Cheres. So in Rabbeinu David's frame of reference, we now have 3 dimensions to Daled Kosos. We've got number 1, 4 cups of wine of shtia, and that requires yayin mazuk. It does not require Seder HaBrochos, so therefore Sheson Masachas Yidei Daled Kosos Yotza. Then we add another element, which is a Hidur mitzvah of Kosos shel bracha, and then a 3rd element of Derech Cheres, which enhances the Hidur mitzvah 1 notch high. Now, I have to tell you that we're not so comfortable with Rabbeinu David because we've gotten so used to this universally accepted principle of Al Seder HaBrachos, and now we're forfeiting that by downgrading that to a lower level. Instead of being primary and essential, becomes secondary. So we're a little bit shall I say, bamboozled by the radical nature of Rebbe David and his departure from everything that we've seen until now. And what becomes primary now is Shtias Arba Kosos, which even in the case of Masachas, he drank Daled Kosos. So as far as the mitzvah Daled Kosos is concerned, he has fulfilled that mitzvah. He's lacking a Hidur mitzvah of Al Seder HaBrachos, or in the case of Chai, he's lacking a Hidur mitzvah of Horas Cherus, but he has in all cases fulfilled the basic mitzvah of Shtias Arba Kosos. Okay, we move on to Rashi. Rashi introduces a concept called Ribui Yayin. And the basic mitzvah of Daled Kosos is Ribui Yayin, a whole new definition. Now, you might ask, how much is Ribui Yayin? For you, it might be X amount. For me, it's Y amount. Everybody has their own sheer subjectively of what constitutes Ribui Yayin. Might be dependent upon different locales and societies on the face of the earth. No. Chazal used the shear of Daled Kosos as the shear of Ribui Yayin. So whatever qualifies as Daled Kosos will qualify as Ribui Yayin and will become a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Daled Kosos. Now, Rashi has already made a radical breakthrough here with a new definition of the mitzvah Daled Kosos, but it goes even further. It's theoretically possible that he could fulfill the Daled Kosos with one kos. That's a radical breakthrough. He starts with Daled Kosos. He hasn't drunk anything yet, but he has the shear of Daled Kosos for the mitzvah of Ribui Yayin. Now he pours them all into one kos, and he drinks them in 4 different segments. So you can have drinking all 4 shiurim of kosos, which are again all in one kos, spread out throughout the entire Haggadah with a bracha that is unique to each one of those shtiyos. Again, you can't say it's unique to each one of the kosos because there's only one kos. But with that kos, he divides it up into 4 shtiyos. And that is the shear of Ribui Yayin because he started with Daled Kosos. So Rashi says that mitzvah zuvas kayemis afin mozag Daled Kosos l'tol kos echad v'shasan. So he already has a mitzvah of Ribui Yayin because he took 4 cups of wine and poured the contents of those 4 cups of wine into one kos. However, what's lacking here is Daled Kosos Chalukos. What happens? He drank all 4 cups in 4 separate drinkings, but from one kos, because he poured all 4 into one. And he says that according to Rashi, he's missing a Hidur mitzvah. Could you imagine? The basic mitzvah he fulfills, even though he drank from one kos. What elements of Hidur mitzvah is he lacking? Number one, it's not kosos chalukos. So separating the 4 cups is a Hidur mitzvah because it generates what's called kosos chalukos, separate kosos. Number 2, part of the Hidur mitzvah is to drink yayin mazuk. yain that's already been diluted. So now we'll go through the two cases. Shesan v'masachas yidei yain yotza pirush yidei chovas ikar mitzvahs daled kosos. Why? He has 4 shtios from one kos, but he has the shear of daled kosos, and therefore he's achieved the basic mitzvah which we define according to Rashi as ribui yain. But lo yotza. What does it mean lo yotza? He didn't fulfill the hidur mitzvah of daled kosos chalukos. Now, why is that a hidur mitzvah? Because there are 4 lashonos of geula, and the 4 kosos correspond to the 4 lashonos of geula. So the horas geula is lacking. Number 2, if he drinks it, now we're on page you test, b'yayin chai, is yidayayin yotza. He has fulfilled his mitzvah of daled kosos, of ribu yayin. Maybe one could have argued he's even more intoxicated, so he has more of a kiyum of ribu yayin. I don't know. But yidei cherus lo yotza, because we said that yidei cherus requires not only daled kosos chalukos, but also requires yayin mos. So in both of these cases of shesan v'masachas and shesan chai, we have A and B. A, he fulfills the basic mitzvah of daled kosos, which is ribu yayin. And B, he has not fulfilled the hidur mitzvah of horas geula. In the case of shesan v'masachas, he doesn't have kosos chalukos, so he hasn't reached that magic number of 4, which correspond to the lashonos of geula. And in the case of yayin chai, because he doesn't demonstrate his cherus, once again, he is lacking in the hidur mitzvah of horas cherus. Honestly, there's something very beautiful about Rashi. Again, I'm a skeptic. I don't believe that this is really what the Gemara had in mind. Don't quote me on that. I'll get in deep trouble when I meet Rashi, in the Olam HaEmes. But if we sort of close our eyes to the Gemara itself, and we've been influenced so much by all the other Rishonim to interpret the Gemara, but we just look at Rashi as a separate, independent entity. There's a certain beauty to Rashi, a certain symmetry to Rashi. And what I mean to say is that, according to Rashi, in both cases in the Gemara, whether it's Masachas or Chai, we really have the same picture. There's a beautiful symmetry here. Whether it's Shesan Masachas, and we're missing the daled kosos chalukos, or Shesan Chai, and we're missing that kiyum cherus of mazud. In both cases, it really touches on the same element, that the basic chiyuv and mitzvah daled kosos is fulfilled because he drank ribu yayin, and the ribu yayin is the shear of daled kosos which he had. He started with daled kosos, and he drank all the wine from those daled kosos with 4 separate shtios. On the other hand, the hidur mitzvah, geula, lashonos shel geula, horas cherus, that he's lacking, either because there are not kosos chalukos, or because it's yayin chai. So let's just think for one moment of the implication of Rashi, of Shitas Rashi. Supposing he's got 4 cups of wine, and instead of pouring them into one large kos, he drinks them in kosos chalukos, but shalom seder habrachos. He has fulfilled not only the basic mitzvah of ribu yayin of daled kosos, but he also has achieved the horas l'shonos shel geula because he drank it in kosos chalukos. Whether or not he has the additional kiyum of cherus, that depends upon whether it was mazud or chan. Is it absolutely clear how this sheet of Rashi is a radical departure from all the previous sheets, including Rabbeinu David? Because although Rabbeinu David introduces the element of Simchas Yontif, And that's the focal point of the sugya. But that Simchas Yontif requires the Daled Kosos, and those Daled Kosos have to be Al Seder HaBrachos. So although he had one out of the 4 Kosos Al Seder HaBrachos, he recited Kiddush on the first kos, drank the first kos. He has a partial kiyum of Simchas Yontif. He doesn't have the full-fledged kiyum of Simchas Yontif vis-a-vis the other 3 kosos. And that's because there was no Seder HaBrachos with regard to the other 3 brachos. But you see, over and over again, whether it's the Rashbam, etc., whether it's Rabbeinu Peretz in his second interpretation, whether it's Rabbeinu David, we're always coming back to the fact that Shom Vasachas means that he has forfeited the kiyum of brachos, which are so essential to Daled Kosos. Not so in Rashi's frame of reference. In Rashi, the Vasachas is a problem with regard to Hider mitzvah, with regard to that additional embellishment. The fact that the Daled Kosos were not on Seder HaBrachos doesn't register at all in Rashi's Richter scale. It's not on the screen at all. We have Riba Yayin if we have the shear of Yayin of Daled Kosos. Whether he drank it, I'll say there, with brachos or without brachos is irrelevant. I mean, you might wonder, according to Rashi, the way we presented it, why is it that we wait to drink each one of the 4 kosos until after the bracha? That doesn't seem to be relevant here. He's got the basic kiyum of Ribu Yayin without the brachos. He's got Kosos Chalukos if he pours the shear of Yayin into 4 cups, which he drank. He drank them consecutively, Shalal Seder HaBrachos. He has the Hider mitzvah of Derech Cherus if it's Yayin Mazul. The brachos don't seem to play a role over here. But it's not possible that Rashi would deny that we drink the Daled Kosos, each one after its bracha. The Gemara says so explicitly. That I don't understand. Okay, we're up to number 5. The Rif and the Rambam. Now, in the Rif and the Rambam, we're going to have 2 versions, both of which are very, very similar. One is the version of the Amudei Hod as a critique of the Brisker Rov, and the other is the Brisker Rov. But again, I'm telling you up front that they're very, very similar. And I think just methodologically, conceptually, the framework here is what we call Tzvei Dinim. If you're familiar with that Brisker terminology. 2 dimensions and 2 kiyumim. What are the 2 kiyumim of Daled Kosos? Number 1, we have the element of cherus, of Daled Kosos, which correspond to the Daled Lashon Shel Geula, and that you can fulfill even with Yayin Echad. Again, we'll have to see what sets it up as Kosos Chalukos. Here's where the bracha plays a role. And number 2, we need Horas Cherus, which he can fulfill only with Yayin Mazul. So again, the first kiyum is the kiyum of Daled Kosos Chalukos, which presumably correspond to the 4 Lashonos of Geula. And the second kiyum is Yayin Mazul, which is indicative of Cherus. So now we have Vasachas. We're not sure exactly how the Rif and the Rambam interpret Vasachas. It's not clear neither in the Rif or the Rambam. They just use that generic term Vasachas, which might mean Rashi's Vasachas, that he poured all 4 kosos into 1 kos. Or I would add more likely the interpretation of all the Rishonim that he drank Daled Kosos, but he drank them consecutively, as we saw in Rabbeinu Tom. So let's go through the Gemara now, according to the Rif and the Rambam's Girsa. Sheson Vasachas Yidei Cherus Yotze, Yidei Daled Kosos Lo Yotze. He was Mekayim the hurrah of Cherus of Daled Kosos. which would make a lot more sense if Masachas, the way Rabbeinu David interprets the Shalol Seder Agoda, but it was in 4 separate kosos. If we're pushing Rashi into the Rif and the Ram, we're going to have to say that the Ross Dalid here is because it was Dalid Shtios, even though they were all from one kos. So the Girsa now is Sheson Vasachas, Yedei Cheres Yotza, Yedei Dalid Kosos Lo Yotza. So what does that mean? Kiem is Bin Horas HaCheres Shel Dalid Kosos. This is the line that we have to focus on, because otherwise we're going to fall into the Brisker Rav, which we don't want to do right now. Ras Cherus Shel Dalid Kosos. What does that mean? Ras Cherus Shel Dalid Kosos. So I think what he's saying here is the following. The yayin is yayin mozuk. So physically, in the physical reality, he drank 4 cups of yayin mozuk. And according to the Rif and the Rambam, everything now is focused on Horas Cheres. Horas Cheres, which was in the other Rishonim, in the perspective of the other Rishonim, was an embellishment of the mitzvah, a Hidur mitzvah. Now Horas Cheres becomes the essential definition of the mitzvah. So Sheson Vas Achas, in the Girsa of the Rif and the Rambam, Yedei Cheres Yotza. Now we define the basic mitzvah as Horas Cheres. So if it says in the Girsa of the Gemara, Sheson Vas Achas, Yedei Cheres Yotza, it means he did fulfill the basic essential mitzvah Daled Kosos, namely Horas Cheres. Where? How? He drank it from one kos, or from 4 kosses consecutively, without reciting the brachos. So the Amudei Hod here has a chiddush. He's saying that according to the Rabbi Yidei Cheres Yotza, because it's yayin mazu. So the element of yayin mazu supplies the Horas Cheres, which is the basic definition of Daled Kosos. So Yidei Daled Kosos, Yidei Cheres Yotza means that the fact that he drank Yayin Mazug achieves for him the Yidei Cheres. A Ben Chorin drinks Yayin Mazug, and that he did, times 4. The problem is that he doesn't have 4 kosos. Either because we're going with Rashi, that he poured them all into one kos, or he did not recite any of the brachos, so he has 4 consecutive kosos. So what's lacking in his cherus? We said that Yidei cherus yotza, because it's yayin mazug. So yayin mazug is enough to give him and qualify for Yidei cherus. However, Yidei daled kosos lo yotza, and that indicates another element in cherus. And the fact that the yayin is mazug is not enough, it's not sufficient, it's necessary in order to get a kiyum, to obtain a kiyum of derech cherus, but it's not the full-fledged kiyum of derech cherus. Why? Because he drank of Masechet. So according to Rashi, he drank it out of one kos. If we go with the other Rishonim, he drank it shalol seder agada. It's the seder agada that, in this interpretation of the Rambam and the Rif, sets up dalid kosos chalukos zu mizu, which is an enhancement of the mitzvah of horas cherus, of derech cherus. So the language of the Gemara is very difficult. It says Yidei dalid kosos lo yotza, which means kosos chalukos, which is a second element, a step up in the kiyum of derech cherus. The first step, the first element is yayin mazug, and that he achieved, but he doesn't have dalid kosos chalukos because it's all in one kos, or he didn't have brachos separating one kos from the other. And the complete and ideal kiyum of cherus is dalid kosos chalukos. So yayin mazug is only a partial kiyum of Yidei cherus, of horas cherus, but the full-fledged kiyum of horas cherus is yayin mazug and dalid kosos chalukos. Sheson chai, so the gears of the Rif and the Ram is Yidei dalid kosos yotza, which means he has dalid kosos chalukos, and that itself is a fulfillment of one dimension, one segment of horas cherus, but Yidei cherus lo yotza because he doesn't have yayin mazug. Hainu shekiyim es dino horas dalid kosos chalukos shebedalid kosos, v'lo kiyim es dino horas cherus shebedalid kosos. And it's really a very subtle distinction he's making here. Umashmos harifa Rambam shekol echem min adina mi akev ukshechiser echem mehem yitztarech lachzor v'lishtos. And that's the punchline of this whole discussion, this whole presentation of the Rif and the Rambam. That again, we're defining dalid kosos as horas cherus. And in the context of horas cherus, you might achieve one element of horas cherus in the absence of the other, but basically you have not fulfilled your mitzvah. So the two elements and conditions of horas cherus, number one, kosos chalukos, and number two, yayin mazug, are both absolutely critical in obtaining the kiyum mitzvah of derech cherus. If you're lacking dalid kosos chalukos, although you had yayin mazug, so you have, shall we say, we'll give you a little bit of the kiyum of horas cherus, but you don't have the most essential kiyum of horas cherus of dalid kosos chalukos. And in the case of yayin chai, although you have dalid kosos chalukos, which gives you, shall we say, a little bit, a taste of the horas cherus, but you're lacking yayin mazug, which is absolutely critical in horas cherus. In that sense, the Rambam and the Rif are the most machmir of all the shittas Rishonim, because we've never seen in the Rishonim that there are two basic conditions, both of which are critical, without which, if you don't check off both A and B, you forfeit the mitzvah. You're going to have to drink another set of dalid kosos, start from scratch. And one of these two conditions, number one, it's got to be dalid kosos chalukos, and number two, it's got to be yayin mazug. If you're missing any of those two, you have forfeited the mitzvah of dalid kosos. which is equal to Horas Cheres. So the Horas Cheres requires Dalit Kosos Chalukos, requires Yain Mozug. In the absence of one of those two, either one of those two, then you do not have the basic mitzvah of Dalit Kosos, which is defined as Horas Cheres. You're going to have to drink another round of Dalit Kosos. All this is before the Brisker Rav. Now we get to the Brisker Rav. That's number above here. And the Brisker Rav says that, again, the mitzvah of Dalit Kosos is a Tzvei Dinim, but not the Tzvei Dinim that we said before, meaning the requirement of Dalit Kosos Chalukos and the requirement of Yain Mozug, both of which are meant to achieve the goal of Horas Cheres, but rather there's one kiyum of bracha, which we call Seder Haggadah, to drink 4 kosos, each of which had its own respective bracha, and that kiyum would be complete if he had Yain Mozug and he drank each kos of Yain Mozug al Seder HaBrachos. He's got a double kiyum. He's got the kiyum of Cheres because it's Yain Mozug. He has the kiyum of Kos Shel Bracha because he drank 4 kosos. Now we get to the 2 cases. We have number 1, the case of Masachas. So he forfeits the kiyum of Dalit Kosos Shel Bracha. And then we have the case of Yain Chai, where he forfeits the kiyum of Derech Cheres. So if, let's say, according to the Brisker Rav, he's missing one of these 2 elements. Let's say, for example, Sheson Masachas. So he's lacking the Kos Shel Bracha kiyum. I don't know. He drank Yain Mozug, but for Masachas, does he have to drink a second round of Dalit Kosos? And then we take the second case where he drank 4 kosos al Seder HaBrachos, but al Yain Chai. So I believe that in order to clarify that, we're going to have to go back to the Brisker Rav again. And then we have, basically, to finish up this overview, we have the Rosh in the Shut. And the Rosh offers a second interpretation, and that we'll see in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow. Okay, then? So we'll stop here on the top of the left column of page Yutes, and hopefully we'll begin Simon Gimel and make progress in Simon Gimel tomorrow. Okay, then? So thank you for for persevering despite the break that we had to take. So I'm happy that I tested negative, but that's good news. Okay, then, everyone should have a great day. And Chodesh Tov, Chanukah Sameach. We have one more night of Chanukah, which we look forward to, Mitzvah Hashem. Sos Chanukah.